All right, welcome to TIL Talks with Chris White, where we talk TILs, tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, and all advanced cell and gene therapies, both with patients and caregivers, along with industry leaders. Let's get going. As a reminder, I am not a medical professional or medical expert. I am only a professional and expert on my story and my experience. If you are needing or seeking medical advice or assistance, please reach out to your care team. And what's up? We are rolling. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of TIL Talks. Here we go again. I want to introduce a very special guest today, someone I got to know in January of 2024 when I was speaking for the BCA in Coronado, California. This is Adrienne Mendoza with BioBridge Global Advanced Therapy. She's the senior vice president. I've got a chance to meet her on a handful of different occasions in person in San Antonio as well. But I'm so glad to have her on here today and a supporter of TIL Talks. And so, Adrienne, I'm going to hand it over to you. Just go ahead and give a little one-on-one on who you are and your background, and we'll get rocking and rolling.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris. And I'm so glad we met. And I remember that day actually down in Coronado. It was beautiful, beautiful weather. We were outside on the patio, and I had a chance to really get to hear your story even further. And it's always been so inspiring. You're one of the biggest inspirations to not only myself, but our whole team at BBG Advanced Therapies and BioBridge Global, the organization that it's within. And I'm so glad to be here today to talk about some really important stuff and hopefully raise awareness with you and be with you on the journey wherever it takes us as this industry evolves as well.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on. So give me a little background about BBG. I know it just celebrated their 50th anniversary. What was it, last year? So now we're going into year 51. It's a conglomerate of organizations, foundations, blood banking, advanced therapies. One of the first to actually be able to store blood on the helicopters for Metaflight, and also now has the world's first mobile leukapheresis bus.
Yeah, we have always been a very pioneering organization. So I'll give a little history. We've been, just as you said, we celebrated our 50th year, and we started as a big regional blood center in South Texas, and we still are actually. One of our subsidiaries, a sister organization to BBG Advanced Therapies, is South Texas Blood and Tissue, and that really was the original beginnings of what is now BioBridge Global and all of the other subsidiaries. Kind of giving background, San Antonio, Texas, in the U.S., it's quite centrally located, and it is a mecca for military activities in San Antonio. In fact, a lot of military bases are nearby, and so as a result, over the years, BioBridge Global, which started as a blood bank, has overlapped in regenerative medicine quite a bit because the military medicine has a strong emphasis on helping wounded warriors who come back from the battlefield who might have injuries that they've sustained, and they need to have some support to heal and get better. And then in the infectious disease area as well, a lot of the military sort of support activities include evaluating biological weapons and countermeasures as well. So as an organization within San Antonio, we've evolved alongside the military medicine arena in regenerative medicines, as well as the infectious disease testing and looking at different bloodborne pathogens. So we've really become an interesting organization because of that ecosystem we're in. And so over time, we've developed high throughput testing for different types of diseases, testing for different biomarkers within blood, cells, and tissues. We've collected tissues to help support regenerative medicine, including the wound healing, and also now cell therapy. We've actually been doing cell therapy for about 15 years of that 50 years total, because we started as an umbilical cord blood bank and cord tissue as well. And then we evolved into being able to actually manufacture cell-based products and tissue-based products. So we have a full suite of clean rooms and analytical technologies to help us evaluate those starting materials and then manufacture them all the way through. So I'm really proud to work for such an incredible organization. We have about 700 people all told, about 70 of which are within the division that I oversee, which is focused on cell and gene therapy. It's taken all the things we do within the enterprise, from the collection of the starting materials, those cell products, even tissue-based products, and then testing those as well as manufacturing and releasing them and doing bioarchive. So we're really, as you said, you mentioned a couple things that we're really proud of doing. One of those was borrowed from military medicine, and that's pre-hospital whole blood. So for those of you who aren't familiar with blood banking in general, as you know, most blood is transfused in hospitals. But if someone is bleeding out in a situation, let's say they got into a car accident or they had a gunshot wound, if they're losing blood rapidly, they may not make it to the hospital or may not be stable enough when they arrive at the hospital to go into surgery to prevent more bleeding. So in military, there has been the adoption of what's called pre-hospital whole blood, and that allows someone who's bleeding out to immediately receive blood as soon as they arrive in the ambulance or the helicopter to transport them to the hospital. So a lot of the military surgeons, military retired surgeons, but they have now become civilian surgeons in our area said, well, why don't we do that for the public? Because we're seeing a lot of accidents and injuries, gunshot wounds and sorts. And let's see if we can create this program. And there were no standards, no regulatory framework to support that type of program, but we still pushed through. And as a result, in 2018, we actually really got going with implementing what's called Brothers in Arms, now Heroes in Arms, which is a special group of donors that is qualified to give O positive whole blood and give that blood so that it can be available on helicopters and ambulances to provide that support to the patient. And we're really glad because a few years ago in 2021, we experienced a horrible tragedy at Uvalde Robb Elementary School, and that's in the area we serve in South Texas. And by that point, the program we had with pre-hospital whole blood had grown to the point of thousands of donors on the registry for that particular program. Every ambulance and every helicopter in the entire 70,000 square mile area carried whole blood. And we even have a helicopter pad within our headquarters building so that the resupply missions from the air ambulances can come pick up more blood in case they have another patient. And that day we got the call to send blood to Uvalde. And we had 2 mass casualty pushpacks, which were on board a helicopter and flown over a great distance that would have taken hours by ground transportation, but within less than an hour, people were receiving blood. Unfortunately, a lot of patients did not make it out of Robb Elementary School in time to get medical care, but those that did, who received blood, they survived. We're really proud of that, and that's the kind of thing we decide, let's do something that hasn't been done before. Let's find a way to pioneer access to medicine, if it's blood, tissue, or cell-based products. It's about how do you provide that service, that product to save a life where the patient is as soon as they can get it. So that's what makes up a lot of the things we're doing, including what we'll talk about, which is the Mobile Leukapheresis Center too. It's really about access to those life-saving products.
That just hits so home. Texas is quite a large state. You could almost fit a good portion of our country, like in the Northeast, multiple states within the state of Texas. I was actually on the phone with USAA this morning, who is based out of San Antonio, and was mentioning that it takes longer to get from the east end of Texas to the west end of Texas than it does to get from one coast to the edge of Texas from either side. Yeah. It is that large of a state, and there's a handful of metroplexes that range basically from the DFW area down to San Antonio to Houston and up within that triangle is pretty much the majority of all of Texas. But within all those other spaces, there's a lot of smaller towns and communities, and they just don't have the infrastructure like a lot of the larger centers do. And so the model that you're setting up within San Antonio and being able to kind of be that example for everybody, not just within Texas or within our organizations, but other states and then other countries and globally. I mean, somebody's got to be the first, and that's just so major cool, because without it, everybody's doing the same thing. They're floundering around going, well, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the rules? How do we, and somebody's got to put one foot in front of the other, and y'all are doing it. and it's
Yeah.
just major cool.
Yeah, we really love doing that. We love blazing the trail. Others follow. It's the entire globe that really that ultimately benefits from some of the work that's being done, not only by us, but the collaborators we work with. There are other blood banks and tissue-based organizations, cell therapy organizations who are like-minded, who want to try to solve for the challenges this field has. And so it's within the arena of collaboration, cross-sector collaboration, bringing others in, even if they are not part of our field historically, but are somehow adjacent to it. It's really about bringing people together, creating something new. So often organizations say, well, there's not a process for that, or there's no standards for that. If we had stopped there with that pre-hospital whole blood, for example, there wouldn't be today a program that's being rolled out nationally, internationally. Standards have been set. The regulatory bodies well recognize this. 2018, that wasn't that long ago, but now the
Yeah.
entire country is adapting to this new paradigm. So more than likely, if you're living in many of the states in the U.S. and some places abroad, you may have access now to pre-hospital whole blood. If you were in an accident, your chances of receiving that are high. And we were able to study the effects of that with a group, speaking of cross-sector collaboration, we brought in the research groups, patient access and transfusion medicine researchers, and they studied the impact that providing pre-hospital whole blood had on survival, and it's a 48% improved survivability for someone
Wow.
who's had an injury. So you can imagine almost half of the people who've passed away in the past prior to this program being implemented could have been saved because of that initiative. That's the kind of life-saving work and pioneering effort we really enjoy being part of because there is tangible results. This is the stuff that's transforming medicine, both in transfusion medicine and now in cell therapy. We believe that it's a matter of, yeah, blazing that trail, bringing others to collaborate, creating the standards, experimenting. Sometimes we don't get it right the first time, so we have to constantly evolve. But it's all about, I hope that one day a person who's diagnosed with cancer hopefully gets detected early enough, right? That's early
Yes.
detection. They can get their cells or blood tested. When you think about that, right? The diagnostics that could be done earlier on in more community settings, then being able to not have to leave their family, not leave their community, and be guided properly through the process to receive a therapy that won't just maintain their disease or keep it at bay, but hopefully provide a more potentially durable, if not curative, solution. And the chances of that happening, I think, in our lifetime are very good as long as we work together to really create the new systems that need to be put in place and installed in communities everywhere.
That's 100% because thinking about it, 18, that was the year I was diagnosed, and it seems like yesterday.
Hmm.
And the treatment that eventually did save my life wasn't available within the Metroplex. I didn't discover that it was even a possibility until almost a year and a half after I was diagnosed. And I was going back and forth between here and Houston doing everything that existed, probably about 19 times or so before I eventually discovered TILS, and it worked. And since it
Yeah.
was a one-time treatment, I was just baffled that I did like everything that existed and had so many side effects, which are still kind of plaguing me today.
Hmm.
And what cell therapy to me does is the sooner you can get to it, the better. It's all about not just survival, but quality of life and
Hmm.
survivorship. And all the other approved treatments that are out there, those are still there and they're still options. But if you don't know that they exist, you don't know to necessarily ask for them. And the treatment that I did for TIL, did get approved and is available commercially in the Metroplex, actually at Baylor. And this past weekend, I was able to go speak for Swim Across America and in their open water swim, and their beneficiary this year in the area goes to Baylor, and what they're doing is exactly what you just mentioned is um, testing to determine, at an earlier stages, if you have something and you go get checked out, if you have a rare disease or cancer or anything, that they can find that sooner than later and then be able to
Yes.
provide you what you need. It's just like I didn't even discover really what like cord blood or the importance of that and what it does and everything until I started meeting you and everybody through the BCA, and
Hmm.
especially when I was down there walking y'all's campus. And by the way, like it's literally like a mini city or campus of sorts where your main facilities are at down there. Like it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
So it's wild, and not just cancers, both solid tumor and hematologic, but the field of cell therapy and autoimmune diseases and that sort of thing. I've said before, I have family with MS, RA, diabetes, Crohn's, things like that. And I would love to see in my lifetime that there'd be more actual cures, because I tell people when it comes to TILs, for me, I don't consider myself in remission, because that would mean that it's dormant and waiting to wake
Hmm.
up. Like, I think I have to wait till I'm officially 10 years to officially use that word, but I use it. But I feel confident in when I have to go do my checkups and my scans. And I was going 4 times a year, and now it's only twice a year since I finished my clinical trial consent. But it's that whole, the more
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
a thing. And I feel that the more that people are talking about it and having the conversations, then
Right.
the more than something little ring in their head if and when they need to, and go, wait a minute, I think I remember hearing about that somewhere. Where was that? Like, let me ask about it.
Yeah. You brought up a really, really good point about these other diseases that are out there that are autoimmune or genetic diseases that need to have some support and better options that are currently available. And in your case too, the solid tumor cancers, if we trace the history of, kind of how these therapies today, cell and gene therapy, are accessed, it goes back to hematological malignancies, blood cancers, and predominantly the cell therapy delivery sites. The hospitals that can perform these today are hospitals that have historically supported blood cancers because of that, because they've been providing, bone marrow transplants for years, 70 years. In fact, 1956 was the first bone marrow transplant. It took place in New York. And since then, our process of where these therapies are available today has not evolved rapidly enough. 70 years have gone by, and we're still pretty much dependent on hospitals that have supported blood cancers. But just like you, receiving a cell therapy, while it's not autologous CAR T, TIL therapy, find the organizations that are able to support that type of therapy who may have experience in cell therapy now, but not necessarily blood cancers. Those are hard to find, and then even harder for internal medicine, endocrinology organizations and hospitals that support a non-cancer treatment, right, to have experience with cell therapy. And I think that's where there's a big opportunity for our industry to really rethink where these therapies are accessed and what we expect of the clinical sites to stand up the ability to support, whether it's a solid tumor therapy or it's an autoimmune therapy, as long as it's cell-based, or gene therapy that uses the body's cells to ultimately be reprogrammed. Those are going to need an entirely new set of infrastructure, because they have not historically been provided outside of the oncology hospitals, and even further, the subset of oncology hospitals that focus on blood cancer. So we really have to broaden the ecosystem in order for our lifetime to have other options, including cell therapies available for diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, lupus, MS. So it's going to be, multiple sclerosis, going to be a lift, but I think it's entirely possible if we just reimagine things a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have met Victoria Gray at the Emily Whitehead Foundation Believe Ball, and she was the first ever patient to be cured through CRISPR gene editing for sickle
Hmm.
cell. And I also met Jimmy Oglery at the Deloitte Next Gen meeting this
Yeah,
past
great
March here
people.
in
Love them both.
Westlake, and was on a panel with him. And such amazing stories, because they had been fighting sickle cell their entire lives. And, when you really start learning about it and how painful it can be and how often you have to get blood transfusions and everything you got to go through, it
Yeah.
just blows my mind. And how I originally got connected with you and the Blood Centers of America as well is through LinkedIn. I had my story on there, but come to find out that for TIL, in order, because there's nothing altered when they grow my cells, but what they have to find the gene that mutated within that cell and then grow it into the billions. And in order to do that, they need feeder cells from a healthy blood donor in order to do what they got to do to pinpoint it and find it. And that's kind of why any healthy blood donor being able to go do a whole blood donation, an apheresis,
Hmm.
platelets, it all goes, either to somebody directly or it goes towards studying. And when I was in the hospital for those, 12 nights, 13 days doing till, I had to get two blood infusions while I was in there, one during the chemo lymphodepletion leading up to my cell infusion, and then one after when I was going through the IL-2. That's, I think, just three instances on its own where blood came into an account to where I needed it both to help be a part of the treatment that saved my life and during it. And I am O positive. And even though I was a rare melanoma patient and had a CMR and considered NED for multiple years now, within the melanoma community, it's kind of frowned upon if I go to donate and everything. So, but I was trying to ask around to a couple of different blood specialists, like, and even my oncologist and everybody else, and just kind of gather some opinions. Like someone like myself that was a stage 4 cancer patient who is, I guess it's been 7 years since diagnosis, going on 5+ years of,
Hmm.
no evidence of disease, CMR. It's been what, 6+ since my actual treatment. Like, would I ever be able to donate again, or should I could you weigh in on that or not? If it's
Yeah,
okay if you
I
can.
no, I can, and I actually think one of the big misconceptions is that if someone has cancer or maybe even a chronic disease, if their cancer is resolved and they're no longer taking some of the medications that might make them ineligible just from if someone else who's going through something else receives blood that contains medicine that's fighting another disease, it can create some problems. But if you're not taking any medicine or the medicine you're taking is not on the deferral list, and you're free of cancer, no longer sick on your side. If your doctor's okay with giving blood, that's perfectly healthy to do so. It's actually a misnomer among like common misnomer that people with maybe even diabetes or an autoimmune disease can't give blood. They can, and as long as their doctor feels it's healthy for them to do so, their blood is not going to create any safety issue for the recipient as long as they're able to demonstrate that they're not taking medicine that could pose a danger. So we have questionnaires. That's why every time to give blood, there's a pretty extensive questionnaire. It goes through
Yeah.
people's travel history. It goes through medication that they're taking. Even though someone might answer yes to those questions because they've traveled or they have something that they're fighting with medicine, it does not mean that they're not eligible to give blood. So we just ask the question so we can evaluate whether or not there's a reason to say not today, but let's say 5 months from now, someone's travel history is not posing a safety. So travel, for example, if someone went to a malaria risk area, they could have had a mosquito bite carrying malaria. So we defer someone who's gone to a very high risk region of the world for a certain period of time until they're able to safely come back and that risk of infection is gone. So same thing, someone's taking medicine
Okay.
and let's say they were taking an immunotherapy that or a biologic that was in their system for a little while, it might be that it needs to come through a few more months of that being out of their system for them to be able to safely give to somebody else. But yeah, I think your chances of being a blood donor and the fact that you're O positive is excellent. You may become our one of our heroes in arms, Chris, giving blood to those pre-hospital because we would screen you for anti-A and anti-B titers. So if you're a low anti-A and anti-B titer, it's your O positive, almost like an O negative. You have a universal blood type then. Very likely be a Heroes in Arms donor. So yeah, if your doctor clears it, we're willing to
I
come
mean, I
on
would
down.
definitely love for it to be studied. Since I was a clinical trial patient, I have all of my records from everything I did before joining the trial. And then a part of the trial in my follow-up visits, I signed some consent, because they had saved, some of my tissue,
Hmm.
for the rare melanomas department to run some studies and to create some DNA through that. And the DNA that I had when I was diagnosed versus the right before I did till, the tumor they took out to grow those cells versus what it is now. I'm very curious to look at it, like see it charted and to see
Hmm.
how different it has changed and what has changed and, all that type of stuff. And I mean, it fascinates me.
Yeah. It does. We know that with people who have received, let's say they had an infectious disease like COVID, during COVID, the pandemic, we actually recruited donors who had been sick because their body naturally develops the antibodies and antigens. So prior to the vaccine becoming available, there was no treatment where you could provide someone with some immunity from COVID except for a very age-old method of collecting plasma from someone who's recovered from the sickness, which is called convalescent plasma, because someone has convalesced, they've gotten better, their body has fought the disease, and so they're carrying some immunity from COVID. So if you collect their plasma and transfuse that to someone who's fighting COVID, you can actually transmit that immunity in a way, those antibodies, helping the patient's body recognize and fight COVID. So that's happened in the past with other bloodborne pathogens, not bloodborne pathogens, but flu type diseases, where convalescent plasma has been used in other points of history besides COVID-19. But it's interesting to think about, can one day some of these therapies that are being provided, which train the body to detect and fight cancer, can that be passed on in blood donation, through blood donation in a way? I don't know. And that's beyond my scientific knowledge to ponder and research. But it certainly is an intriguing idea about how the body has responded to this reprogramming of sorts to the cells, and how those cells can now detect and better fight and keep those cancer cells at bay. Can that also serve a role like convalescent plasma does?
Hmm.
I don't know. The answer is probably better answered by someone besides myself, but I think that it's a good question to ask.
Yeah, it's just I also do these talks with Dr. Powderly out of North Carolina. He's with the Carolina Bio-Oncology Institute and Biocytics. And on our last conversation, we started talking about, if I was tested for specific gene mutations and a lot of that. And when I had my pathology done in the beginning, when I was diagnosed, it came up, SOX10 mark, whatever, but I had a CDK4 amplification with an MDM2 mutation. But other than that, I didn't have the typical melanoma markers, which is usually like BRAF, c-KIT, or NRAS or something like that. They called it wild type. And so that's why I tell people when I kind of tell my story, like a lot of the medications and treatments that I did was like a you kind of trial and error. They were like, well, we don't know, but maybe. And so I say it's like throwing a spaghetti at the wall. Maybe it might stick, maybe it won't, but you got to try. And so I didn't really question or ask about much of the treatments or any of the science behind it as I was going through it, because I was way over my head and still is. But in the years since, especially recently over the last couple of years, and I just kind of really dug into it, I'm constantly adapting and learning about all of these advanced cell therapies and how they came about and what they do and how they work. And I'm sure you're not surprised. But how many people, when you ask them about anything that's related to rare disease or cancer, for cancer, for example, they just assume or think, cut it out. And that's what you do. And I would always advise people, like, that's not necessary. What you should do there, that almost can make it angry
Mhm.
and make it
Yeah.
want to run away and spread. And so neoadjuvant treatment versus adjuvant treatment. But cell therapies, like I was saying earlier, it's so simple to me because I just think of quality of life. Like if I would have been able to do it sooner than later, probably would have not as had so many side effects that I ended up getting, especially that have kind of lingered long term. And what y'all are doing with the mobile leukapheresis bus, I kind of see it as this like hybrid model for like solid tumors. So like in theory, like what if, because I had to take 3 separate trips to Colorado from Dallas Fort Worth on an airplane. And on that third trip is when I actually had my hospital stay. But the first trip I did sign my consent, had to do some labs, see the oncologist in person. I had to do another colonoscopy because I previously had colitis, but then came back. A few weeks later after that, I had to fly back out there to do my surgery so they could harvest for the cells, and then Dallas Fort Worth back to Denver. And then they had to fly my cells from Denver to Philadelphia Navy Yard to get grown into the billions and QA and everything. And then so I flew back to Dallas and waited for that. And then I had to fly back the third time to go to Denver to be admitted to the hospital for lymphodepletion and then to receive my cells. But in theory, what if there was a certified surgeon, a nurse, and like a small team that could travel and they could show up at any hospital because they had those certifications to where I could have had my labs done and all those first tests I did on that first trip virtually and done them locally. The second trip where I went out there for the surgery, what if the surgeon could have came to me locally? And then because the company that ships it to Philadelphia, they're all over the place. So they could always have a courier very quickly. And then I would, if possible, I could only had to go out to Colorado for that one time for that 2 weeks, to the ATC center. And so what the mobile leukapheresis bus is doing, in order for like cell collection to be able to go to those kind of rural areas that don't have a center set up for somebody to go to, because if it's over 200 miles, it's a very long day if you're driving back and forth for that same day, or it's a hospital stay overnight, and then those costs. And if you're sick, somebody's usually coming with you, and then that taxes on them. And so like it's the concept, not just the bus itself and what it's doing, but like the concept of this hybrid model. I would imagine there's people all over the state, the country, and the globe that are coming to y'all, and you can almost make a consulting business out of what you're doing with the leukapheresis bus. But I mean, like you got one, you're trying to fundraise for a second, but start getting fleets of them and then start enacting these hybrid models of advanced cell therapies for patient access. One, educating patients that they exist, but if more places had them or had availability of them, people like myself wouldn't be going all over the country to get what they need to get. And if you don't have PPO insurance, you're usually only stuck with what's in your state. And
true. Interestingly, and you mentioned there's people all over the country and the world who are interested in this model and trying to revisit how the therapies create the journey for the patients that they do today, and how to revise that, because it is a big barrier to access. And I think only 1 in 10 people, and I think even that number is probably a little bit generous, actually, who's qualified ever receives these therapies. So one of the things that resonated interestingly enough in Europe, which I was just recently, I came back from Spain a few weeks ago, and I was invited to speak at the Cell and Gene Therapies Innovators Conference. It's like a small gathering of biotech and pharmaceutical executives working on this field, and it's focused on improving access for patients. So it was a really perfect venue for me to go to and share the idea of the Mobile Leukapheresis Center to the European audience. And I was amazed at how much it resonated with them as well. I knew that there were potentially access challenges which were similar there, but it actually was even more complex than the US, which I found to be quite interesting. So when I was there, I presented that I think of access to cell and gene therapies as being comprised of 3 pillars. The first is the place where the therapy is available. The knowledge about it is the second pillar, and the affordability of it. And we have to really address all 3, but the Mobile Leukapheresis Center, and to your point, other models like that can actually address all 3. And the way that is, first of all, in terms of the place, as I mentioned before, 70 years, these therapies have been provided in certain places, academic medical centers, research hospitals, but specifically even within that, it's the blood cancer focus areas.
They would have to have a BMT unit of sorts, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Because the bone marrow transplants model has been to collect the cells in the hospital, process and manufacture them actually there, and then they're transfused or transplanted. But so this model of cell and gene therapy has, especially with autologous CAR T, evolved from that design where the cells are collected in the hospital. The problem with that in that model is that it looks very foreign and different from any other field of medicine we have. But it's not, when you think about the actual drug delivery, is more like a blood transfusion than anything else. And blood transfusions are carried out at scale around the world by almost every hospital, for sure. Clinical sites too, oncology and other community healthcare practices throughout the world, they understand blood transfusion. So the question becomes, how do you revise the expectations of the clinical site so that what they do in the end to provide these therapies, whether they're autologous CAR T, a TIL therapy, an in vivo therapy, if what they do in the end looks more like what they do in traditional medicine and more like what they already contend with, your likelihood of being able to expand that because the knowledge base is already there to work with. It makes it look familiar. Now you're addressing the second pillars. Not only are you bringing something that's required in the infrastructure to more places, in this case, with the Mobile Leukapheresis Center, it's the cell collection, but you're also allowing the clinical site to uptake what they do because it's much more similar to what they already work with, because they're just really at the end handling the final product and transfusing them. And then affordability, one Mobile Leukapheresis Center with a team that goes place to place, it's a centralized cost model, but it's a decentralized geography. One center here in South Texas can support 70,000 square miles. That's like 180,000 square kilometers. So it's like half the size of Spain. And I was telling them that when I was in Spain talking about this, and more than 20 or so hospitals in that area who are pretty much acute medical centers handling complex diseases, but maybe not today handling cell therapies or gene therapies. Suddenly those centers have all the capabilities they need. They don't need anything else. They need some experience. They
Right.
have to start doing it, right? But it is within their capabilities. So with the one center, one system, a change in just that first step, now we've created a cascade where you take you can actually expand the number of places. One mobile center expands market access. It reduces the cost of goods. It ultimately unlocks that last pillar of affordability too. And that's how you're going to unlock true accessibility. You're going to unlock it through updating the places where therapies are provided, creating more knowledge about them by practice, and having it look more like what they already know, and creating cost efficient models that are centralized from efficiency standpoint, but decentralized in their footprint. That's, I believe, the way all of these therapies are going to become accessible.
It's like an outlet mall. Like I use this in some examples, but there's like Nordstrom Rack. You can go to the main mall and go to Nordstrom's, but you can go to the little outlet mall and go to Nordstrom Rack, which is just has like a fraction of like their apparel, but there's more of them, and so it's not a full out centralized or full out decentralized. That's why I always say it's kind of like a hybrid model of it.
Yeah.
But that the whole access thing mixed with the education part of it, because it always blows my mind anytime I go and I'm able to be on a panel or do any kind of speaking, that I'm majority of the time usually like the only patient they have ever met that has received a cell therapy. And it's like, if I was a mechanic and I was building engines but never saw them run in a vehicle, like it's kind of like you're working all day long on something really hard for something really important, but you're never seeing the results of your work. And so that's why I feel it's like super important for me to go out there and try to talk about my story and talk about these treatments, but just in a simplistic kind of manner that makes them understandable, because it can get real technical when
Yeah.
you're like at a lot of these conferences and these communities and everything, and they're talking a lot of this vernacular and jargon, and some, if you're not within that medical realm or field, it can go, you know what I mean? So that's why
Right.
I use that Pac-Man analogy all the time, every time I tell my story, because to me, it was like, as soon as I heard that, I was like, huh, okay, that makes sense. It's your cells, AKA cell therapy. But to me, it was like, I tried all this other stuff. Like, why didn't I try this first? So
Right.
then it started making more sense. So it was like, whatever made me sick is going to make me better. I just need more of it.
Yeah. And my before I met you, of course, and others like Jimmy, you mentioned earlier, who received the sickle cell gene therapy, my knowledge base of patients was really around those who I was interacting with who received blood transfusions, whether they were in an accident before or they had a chronic disease, maybe sickle cell disease, and they were receiving these transfusions routinely, maybe because they were fighting cancer with chemotherapy, which takes a huge toll on the body's blood systems, and they need support with platelet donors quite often. But when I was, I think my first source of inspiration and the need for change to change the way we fight disease was with my mom when I was very young. She passed away from ovarian cancer when she was just 40 years old. And we had moved from from California to New Zealand in a sort of a bucket list situation because she had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And the chances of her surviving 5 years at that point were probably highly unlikely unless some miracle came out, new drug came out in that time frame, which was very unlikely. So we moved to New Zealand where she received, chemotherapy and radiation, and actually that's in a way my first encounter with blood transfusion because the blood she received was able to help her be strong enough to go out with us and do amazing tours around New Zealand. It was incredible that being able to create those memories. But she couldn't go she had to stay close to where she could go back and get her next dose of chemotherapy, her next blood transfusion. She was really kind of tethered to the hospital at a point in time.
Yeah.
Eventually, we moved back to the U.S. because there was a clinical trial going on in San Diego. I actually grew up in Coronado, where you and I met.
Cool.
So yeah, we were back in Coronado, and she was able to go through a clinical trial that was actually conducted at the hospital in Coronado. Unfortunately, it was a new drug they were testing for ovarian cancer. She just didn't make it. She passed away a couple of months later. But to think that today, almost 40 years later, we're still dealing with not 40 years, sorry. I think it's been almost 40. It will be 40 years since my mom passed away. If we're still using chemotherapy, radiation, surgery for those diseases, we'll have not done our job in medicine. 40 years have passed since my mom passed away almost by
Wow.
2029.
Yeah.
So I'm like bound and determined to create better options. I mean, I'm so thankful for blood donors today that help patients who are fighting those diseases have a chance for a somewhat normal life because that gives them the energy to do things like what we got to. But we have to find better options, and we know they're out there. That's the reality, is we don't have to find them anymore. The
Yeah.
options are there.
Like immunotherapy got its first approval in what, like 2012 or somewhere around there. CAR T got approved in 2017. I remember that. My grandmother passed away in 2001 on my mom's side from lung cancer. And at the time, I think chemotherapy was the only thing available. I'm not even sure if she was doing any clinical trials for immunotherapy.
Mhm.
But she was in stained glass, and that's what they think probably ended up causing that. And then my grandfather, um, about 10, 11 years after that, passed away from blood cancer. And it was right at the time, I want to say, so 2012. I remember going to see him, and he was in and out of the BMT unit, and they're always checking his platelets and everything. But um, I'm not sure if he was in a CAR T trial or available to do so. I never got to see his medical records and this and that.
Mhm.
But nowadays, his options, 13 years later, 14 years later, would be so much more out the gate. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
CAR T having its approval in 2017, it's got like a 7-year head start on TIL's approval. And so as each year goes on, and it gets approved for more and more types of cancers and diseases and becomes more known and prevalent, hopefully that'll be what people think of when they get a diagnosis, rather than what I thought of in 2018, like, oh, I got cancer, go cut it out. Or just like, because that's what I thought. It was like, oh, do some chemotherapy and some radiation. I didn't even know what immunotherapy was. Like, I thought I had heard of CAR T, but maybe asked about it. But since it was a solid tumor, not hematologic, it wasn't a
Yeah.
thing. And in my mind, I thought that I had to do all the approved treatments first and use a clinical trial as like a last ditch option, to which if I could time travel and tell my previous self, I would have done it backwards. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
it's,
it is incredible how much things have evolved in the past just 10 years. I think a lot of, approvals, the path is laid out as far as how to get these therapies approved, how to assess their potency in many cases. There's still a few mysteries to unravel. That's other parts we work on within BBG Advanced Therapies, is helping sort out the right test methods and develop the processes to scale. But I do think that we're at an inflection point in the industry where investors are worried that while the science is there, and there are certainly incredible provocative studies that show that these therapies are extremely durable, just due to the complexities and the number of challenges patients have in accessing, how many physicians even refer or even know about these therapies, how many, as you mentioned, it's not widely available. Most people, when they find out what you and I are part of in this industry now, they had no idea. This is not common knowledge. And it's not common knowledge among healthcare practitioners either. It's not just the people we work with who might, be our automotive mechanic that are maybe not familiar with healthcare, but even a nurse practitioner or a doctor in a community-based healthcare setting may not understand the impact these therapies can have, how to navigate them. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're at an inflection point where investors and shareholders who've invested and put forth money in these therapies coming to market are getting weary of whether they're able to reach the market size and the point of access that was expected. So there's a lot of urgency in going through this reinvention of how these therapies are accessed, creating more places where they can go. It needs disruption in a positive way because we're, like I said, still dependent on a 70-year-old architecture of how
Right.
these therapies are delivered. It's got to change. I am worried we don't operate fast enough in the industry. We've had the opportunity to solve for patient access, I would say, for the past 5 years. I think this problem has really become very apparent. I think it's been misunderstood as being a manufacturing capacity problem only. I think that's part of it. But it's even we can make all the manufacturing capacities in the world, but if patients aren't getting referred, if they're not able to receive the therapy, there's no amount of manufacturing capacity that will help that. So we need to address this, and it's urgent because I fear that the future of medicine, which is very, very exciting if we think about cell therapy because of their impact, I think it's in question today. I think that there's a very slippery slope that we're on right now to investors lost in confidence that these therapies will actually make their way to the market. So the market access, meaning patient access, has to improve urgently.
I literally refer to cell therapies as curative treatments, and again, talking about quality of life. So the kind of question I'm always asking everybody is the type of like education programs, both for like just the population to know that they exist, but then also in the medical and clinical community, like
Mhm.
kind of continuing education. Say there's somebody that's getting ready to graduate high school and go into college. Like, is there a program that's specifically set up that directly leads into the cell therapy field, or do you have to kind of get in there by default by becoming like a biology or chemistry or like an engineer, architect kind of a thing, and then fall into the cell therapy field by chance? But from what I understand, it connected with one gentleman who is a professor in Philadelphia and teaches a intro class into
Mhm.
cell therapy, but like I think it's the only one I've ever heard of.
Right. Very
And
rare.
so, but from an industry standpoint, like, how are people like, is there a marketing kind of a plan, a continuing education kind of a plan? Because both the population needs to know, and then also the
Mhm.
hospital settings, and then those that are in the clinics and the labs. And it's one of the main reasons, like, I'm trying to be disruptive
Right.
with this is because these conversational kind of engagements are more, you can just listen to them as you're driving. You don't have to necessarily watch it. I mean, I turned off my cable and all my streaming channels a couple of years ago. I barely ever even turn on my TV. Most people from get all of their news through their phone. I mean, or their computer, and you can select whether it's social media or your podcast or YouTube or, and there's a lot of educational information out there, but that's why I have all of my platforms are public, and there's at least a half a dozen of them. And I noticed that through my analytics that the majority of people that are watching, like a lot of the short clips that comes from these Teal Talks, are 90% are non-followers, which means that they are hearing about them. But I don't think, from what I understand, that there's anything specifically, like there's not a line item in place somewhere. There's usually not a budget like for patient education and or the physician side. A lot of the hospital settings and urban areas are like, they just don't know. And
Right.
so
Yeah. I think that is a big gap. I know the most recent sort of change in health, like a bill that has passed federally to improve education within the physicians and healthcare practice education. There's been a recent bill to improve knowledge and education around nutritional, because that hasn't been a big focus in the past in medicine. But to my knowledge, there's not, and I think that's great, by the way. I do believe that's an important aspect of medicine is understanding how nutrition plays a role, right? And you and I have talked about this a little
100%.
bit. But I do think there's room for improvement on additional sort of expectations that curricula have in healthcare, or in community practice settings for providing knowledge and education to what opportunities there are for patients to navigate. I know that patients are expected to be their own advocates. That worries me a lot that we don't have systems set up in healthcare to provide that advocacy for the patients. And patients may not have the means, education, background, technology to find a way to navigate the healthcare setting. It's hard for me, and I work in the healthcare professions, to navigate healthcare. So, what if I'm not a native English speaker? What if I have a predisposed concern about research? And what if my physician doesn't have any knowledge about where or how to navigate these cell therapies? The likelihood of me having access to these therapies is probably zero. So we need to find better ways to stand up accessible knowledge systems. And I think AI could play a big role in this, helping navigate and helping support even the language barriers or communication education barriers that both healthcare practitioners as well as community members and citizens who are navigating this. I think there's a focus. And so, yes, I agree that programs need to be established in education for not only scientists who want to go into this field to continue to explore the capacities and the support for innovation, but also in the practice of healthcare, navigating for patients, community navigators, for anyone who's maybe living in a local community who may not know or have access to an internet and to be able to, or AI systems to be able to help navigate for them. So there needs to be more support for all players within this field and education systems to allow for it to expand.
100%. I mean, it just absolutely drives me bonkers when the word cancer or any kind of rare disease comes up, and, you know, cell therapy is not mentioned first. It doesn't even come up. They talk about, like you said, the 70-year-old mindset of traditional surgeries and chemotherapies and that kind of thing. And,
Hmm.
you know, it's so unfortunate that people like myself, we have to learn by default that they're even out there. And, like every time or two, I do turn on the TV, say I'm checking the weather, and it's like during the evening news or something. And then there's a commercial for some sort of medicine through a pharma company or something. It drives me nuts when they play these, say they're a 60 to 90-second like commercial, and they show everybody like living happy, and, but like they spend 60 out of those 90 seconds talking about the real gnarly side effects, and they just like blaze through it and everything, but nothing about cell therapies or anything,
Hmm.
or clinical trials. But I would love to see, that out there, because Till, for example, now commercially is about $500,000. I can almost guarantee I spent something near that doing all the other things I did before I got to Till, both with travel and then infusions and surgeries and radiation, chemotherapies, immunotherapies, and then all the medications and colitis and the Remicade and the hospitalizations. And I'm sure it added up. And so it's like,
Yeah.
if you do a cell therapy first and it does work, it could be a durable treatment, and also preserve the quality of life.
Yeah.
And then I would love to see more patient invites at a lot of these conferences. Most of the ones I attend, it's usually like me and like one other person. Like there's like pretty much it's like single digits at a lot of the cell therapy specific type of events and conferences and stuff. And they're always super ecstatic to meet somebody. And I think that both the patients and the clinical community can learn so much directly from the patient about what it was like. Cause I got a DM this morning from somebody whose melanoma came back, and They had tried everything and they're looking to do TIL. And so I'm reconstructing my original mucosal melanoma survivor website, and I'm coming up with a frequently asked questions
Yeah.
kind of thing on what to bring and how to prepare for, your hospital stay, and kind of explain my experience, because it's different for everybody. But if you're in better condition and haven't been so pre-treated, the
Mm.
likeliness, of it working sooner than later is, probably is going to show. In the confirmatory trial for the treatment that I did is in progress right now as a global trial. And, from what I understand, those efficacies are showing that the sooner the better for it to work. And so I'm trying to think of ways to appropriately be disruptive. But I never had a marketing background or business background. I'm just trying to get out there and network and see what I can do. And it can kind of be a little flustering sometimes, because everything I did before, what I'm trying to do now, was just a paycheck. But what I'm trying to do now, it's purposeful, it's
Yeah.
meaningful. And I believe in it to my core, that there's got to be an education program somewhere or in marketing that discusses and talks about curative treatments, and advanced cell therapies. But yeah, the 70-year-old model of like chemo and those sort of things, like, or
Right.
doing like for like Victoria and Jimmy that did CRISPR, they're having to constantly go get blood transfusions and almost like literally live in a hospital. I mean, like, and hospitals aren't hotels.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I applaud you for doing this because I know it takes a lot of energy and effort to pull together these podcasts, invite the guests, and you're doing an incredible work that is really not, I'm not aware of other form formulas like this or programs like this that feature the host who is a survivor who's experienced the patient journey, and is aware of these therapies and some of the complexities involved in creating uh, challenges towards access. So you're bringing awareness in your way, and some of the things that we're doing, and I hope we can, if we're both lucky, we can have some sort of viral YouTube video or something that will take flight. But my mechanism to try to help with our BBG Advanced Therapies group is using Tuffy, which is a mascot we created. In fact,
Yeah.
I have a I have Tuffy here. He's with
I
me.
see
Yeah.
that on all of your biweekly blogs.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
and
always
he's
usually like on your thumbnail, I think, right?
right. Yeah, exactly. And I'm exploring ways to help educate using Tuffy because it is a little bit like a child's character, like maybe a book, and I know others have similar great, cute mascots and whatnot to help understand. And right now it's more industry facing, but I do think there's a role that we can play and other organizations like us can in community education, healthcare education, because we don't have a therapeutic entity or uh, we don't have a therapeutic asset like a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company has, where they're restricted in what and how they can say things. We're not going to be talking about a specific drug, right, or a
Yeah.
specific indication, but how these therapies work in general, how they are accessed in general, and those conversations, if they're relatable, if they're interesting, they can it can actually, I believe there's a role we play. In fact, one of the conferences we were at where we showcased the Mobile Leukapheresis Center, we had a guest come on board and she was very impressed with the center, but she pulled me aside and said, Adrian, I think there's something more than this. You showed me the video because we had the video playing on board of Tuffy.
Hmm.
It was like we were talking about how the Mobile Leukapheresis Center is like a school bus that goes out and picks the cells up and takes them to training camp so they can come back stronger and able to fight the cancer or other diseases, right? So we were showcasing that video and she said, Adrian, you've got something even more important here than just the Mobile Leukapheresis Center. That as a platform is great, but it's a platform for education too. She said you can use that and that technology of how you're creating these characters to help provide the segue that this industry needs between industry and community being patients and providers. So I believe in that, and we're going to try really hard to create some additional material. We're limited on our marketing budgets. Obviously, we're nonprofit. We just really are focused on the mission of helping this field advance, but that's part of it. Education is part of it. So I think we need some miracles of people watching and sharing that content so that it can become more widespread and take on a life of its own. I would love to see a day where people kind of get this through between social media today and the ability to have something spread globally is in terms of a concept and knowledge is incredibly powerful. We have to tap
Yeah.
into that somehow because I think that that energy that can be created by people being aware that these things exist and how they actually happen. To your point earlier, it's like this aha moment. It seems so simple. You're just helping the body do its own work.
Yeah.
You're just
Yeah.
giving it a boost. So it's very simple in the end.
I say this a lot. In my ideal career, if I could do this full time, would be to travel around to hospitals and to schools of all education levels and sizes, colleges, universities, but high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. Like if they have assemblies and stuff, they, guest speaker, but in conversational form, nothing too complex. But the earlier of an age that you just even like hear about it, but then as they grow older, then it becomes a little bit more prevalent and more prevalent. And one of the statistics that reminded me the other day at the Swim Across America event is, like 40% of the population, unfortunately, throughout their lifetime, or most likely get some form of cancer, or if not, it might be somebody they know or they could be affected by it. But if there's something in place or a program in place in a school setting or something where at an assembly or at a college or a university, so both the educational side and the student side, but just hearing about it, period, it definitely just kind of plants that seed. And then the more that the industry and these treatments evolve and get approved, and just it starts ringing more bells and more bells. And it's almost like the Pavlov thing. And then over time, it just that'll be the first thing that snaps into your head when you
Hmm.
get sick or you go ask about a treatment or get a diagnosis. What should I do? But there's not something that's necessarily in place. And so I've been trying to, wing it for the last couple of years. And I've been on this kind of roller coaster of ups and downs, emotionally, financially, mentally, physically. And I don't know. I have an idea, just don't know how to implement it and then finance it. But I'm really hopeful in it and I believe in it. And it is the future of medicine. It's just, I think some of us might be a little ahead of our time in our sense of urgency for it. Because like you were saying earlier, investors, these things need to get funded, and companies, startups, clinical trials, all of it. And if investors are weary, I mean, like everything's risky, but there's no reward without risk. And like Wayne Gretzky said, you're only going to miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So
Yes.
you got to start somewhere. But that'd be super cool to like if y'all made like a little cartoon series, or I'm sure you like a little book you can publish, start distributing to elementary
Right.
schools, and then also for different age groups as they get older, and
Hmm.
or something like that.
And being able to use the platform across the country and the world of blood centers honestly is an interesting thing to think about. We already do so much community wide to help educate around the need for blood products, which is not going away, right? That's going to be continue to be a theme, and people will still always need blood. There's no synthetic equivalent to that. If there were, it's many, I mean, there might be for rare blood types, but it would be impractical at this point to see that in our lifetime. So it's going to be something that's around. But I think the role of blood banks like ours evolves. It evolves to be the center point for cell therapies to travel to and from the vein to the hospital and to help educate the community, not only for the donors that supply those important cells for the feeder layer cells, for example, with the TIL therapy that you received, but and that's just only going to increase the number of donors required for those will grow as allogeneic CAR T continues to gain momentum and eventually get approved for a commercial therapy. There'll be needs for donors for MSC-based products, which are mesenchymal stromal cells. Those we see quite often to help reduce anti-inflammatory or autoimmune diseases. So the need for donors will be there on the feeder layer cells, the leukocytes and leukopaks. But I think there's a role we can play because it's not just us. BBG Advanced Therapies can be a leading pioneer and help support, like the idea of the concept, and help educate and possibly franchise out some of these capabilities to other locations where we have willing collaborators to help advance this mission. But I think it's a role that blood centers can play to help educate the community, to help spread the word too, just like we do in every day across the country and the world around the need for blood donors.
Yeah, the need for blood has always been for the existence of people. You're
Yeah.
always going to have a need for blood. Like that's not going away no matter what. And so there's always a need for donors. There's always a need for blood for research. And then I spoke to an organization that's working on TIL therapy, but instead of using feeder cells, they do use CRISPR gene editing
Mm-hmm.
in order to pinpoint it. So there's multiple ways of doing TIL, but I also know they're working on CAR T for solid tumors, and they're also working on
Yep.
TIL for hematologic cancers and disease. So it's all this crossover that's going on and a lot of different research and everything. And, the BCA is a conglomerate of a lot of blood centers like yourselves, BCA standing for the Blood Centers of America.
Right.
And so you got to remind me how many organizations are a part of that co-op?
Yeah, I forgot the number, but just to give you the magnitude, Blood Centers of America, its members, including our organization, support about 60% of the nation's blood supply in the U.S. Of course, they're also very closely tied to the Association for the Advancement of Blood and Biotherapies, which is an international standards body and education forum for blood and biotherapies, including cell therapies. And then also America's Blood Centers, ABC, which is actually the entire US and parts of the international ecosystem, including other important players such as the American Red Cross, which supplies about 40% of the nation's blood supply. So between Blood Centers of America, AABB, which is the Association for the Advancement of Blood and Biotherapies, America's Blood Centers, there's a lot of acronyms, and
No, yeah.
there is an active collaboration among these organizations to help advance this field and create an important avenue for the logistics support, as well as the donor support, as well as the hopefully community engagement support. So as members there of Blood Centers of America, we have the opportunity to really cross-pollinate and share
Just say it's like a
models.
spider web of sorts.
Exactly. And we can also, when let's say a company needs to access needs a large number of donor leukopaks or other starting materials that maybe one region alone would not be able to fulfill the need, we can work together across the country to create the same standardized protocol so that they have one group of organizations they're working with which are all on the same page and able to supply that larger demand. So we see our role. I think we're coming into ourselves, still learning, right? We're still sharing, and we all as a group, we have different parts of the puzzle we're working on. Some are exploring more of the traveling team that goes into the donor centers with equipment and starts things. We have the mobile center where it's all self-contained and more of a fixed site on wheels. And then we have other organizations working on different test methods, different manufacturing tools and techniques. So I think the sharing of those resources and the knowledge is what empowers the whole group. And so I think we have a very important role to play as organizations in the future of this field too.
Now, are you talking to me today from your headquarters at BBG, or are you in Velocity at the Advanced Therapies location?
Yeah, exactly. My office is at the Velocity campus. So
Okay.
so for those viewers of yours or listeners in San Antonio, there is a innovation center for biotechnology, which is called Velocity Texas. And BioBridge Global and BBG Advanced Therapies are the anchor tenants. We're the largest tenant within this innovation district. And the city has invested, and philanthropic efforts have also co-invested in creating a place where researchers from all different parts of biotechnology can come together in a sort of a collision center where they can invite and engage each other on collaborative projects. And so we're the anchor tenant there, and that's where my office is. But just as you mentioned, Chris, we have a large headquarters just down the road, about 10 minutes away, where we operate one of the largest testing laboratories in the U.S. for blood products and plasma products. as well as tissues, which is Qualtex Laboratories. That's our sister subsidiary. And then that's also the headquarters for South Texas Blood and Tissue. We have other facilities beyond those two campuses, which include donor rooms throughout the region of South Texas, over about 70,000 square miles. So we're quite spread out, but
Yeah.
I'm the only corporate officer who maintains an office at Velocity, Texas, and I really enjoy it. It's a great atmosphere and it's a great energy. And I do spend time at headquarters quite often too. And half of our BBG Advanced Therapies team, the starting materials team, is over there with the big campus. So we're kind of a split group in terms of geography, but we're all one group.
Yeah, I was just blown away first time I came down there and was able to see the main campus. I was like, this place is huge. Oh my God, I've toured a handful of labs before, but I was just very impressed. And then going to see the Velocity location was just mega cool because as you're walking throughout there, I mean, it's kind of like you got these little office spaces for these little two-man startup type of things, but they're coming up with a lot of the technology and the automation for that actually goes into the labs that help grow cells. And there's all these different moving parts and pieces and stuff, but it's just this environment, I guess, or community of all like-minded people with the same kind of idea of they're part of the assembly line, I guess, per se. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
what I mean, like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a great energy because everyone here is innovative. They're trying to solve complex problems, different parts of the regenerative medicine kind of arena. So we have the 59th Air Medical Wing, and the Institute of Surgical Research are actually tenants here too, and some of their
cool.
researchers stay here. It's not their headquarters by any means, but they have their research activities carried out in a location where they can interact with other researchers working on regenerative wound care processes or looking at organ sustaining organs after they've been donated, and they're able to support those organs in transit from place to place. And then, of course, we intersect those worlds with regenerative medicines we're helping support the production of for the field here. And we help collaborate with them on test methods if need be, and on processing methods to preserve the regenerative qualities of the tissues and the cells. So yeah, very exciting place to be where everyone has that energy of how do we do groundbreaking work? How do we make sure these therapies and these solutions reach the hands of the innovators who are ultimately creating the next generation of medicine to support more patients? So you really can't be at.
Because everything's always evolving and changing too. So say you come up with an idea, you put it into place, and then by the time you see it through fruition, like it may or may not be obsolete or even usable. But also you need to know like whatever it is you're using it for, if it's going to be a part of the approved process or not. So there's a lot to keep up with. Going back to the Luca bus, from what I understand, y'all got your approval to put it out on the road and to start using
Mhm.
it. Is it currently in action?
Yeah, it's so we are this month wrapping up the full validation of that, and we've been doing an extensive test, like real world conditions. Since it's the first of its kind, we wanted to make sure we put it through the ringer,
Yeah.
hard stops and turns,
Okay.
and because everything stays on board the mobile leukapheresis center, right? It stays inside, so that way when we go to a place, we don't have to do any additional
Yeah,
setup
moving
except for
stuff
doing.
around and it's not
Yeah.
shifting and
Yep. So we've been doing all of our real world validation efforts to make sure that everything performs satisfactorily, and it's gone really, really well. So we're at the point of closing those validations up, and we'll be getting our first donors. We could do the donors today, but we actually have some opportunities to capture and memorialize those first donors because it's a historic moment. We think about we look back to 70 years from now, we're going to say, oh, that was the day that those first donors were on that bus, the first time ever in the world a bus was able to support a collection event. So we'll have donors first, and then we've been invited to support possibly some patient apheresis. I can't speak to it too much right now, but there
yeah, yeah, yeah.
is some collaboration going on to hopefully enroll some patients and some donors for supporting the field of transplantation as well. So it's going to be the bus can be used in its namesake, leukapheresis, but it also can be used for apheresis for CD34 positive cells. So it can be for either white cells or T cells, NK cells, immune cells, which are the leukocytes, or it can be used for stem cells as well. So
Cool.
we can use it in numerous ways. So there's a lot of excitement around rolling it out. We'll be taking the bus all over South Texas, and hopefully we'll get a chance early in the year to showcase it at another event, like we did for ISCT and ASGCT. So we're just aligning our schedules with when patients and donors will be on the bus to make sure that we don't deprioritize anything like that. We may or may not go on in live to showcase the bus again, depending on those other activities. But it's very exciting. We're raising funds through our Red and White Ball for the second Mobile Leukapheresis Center, and that's to do two things. Number one, to help us have a redundancy so that we'll never be without having, let's say one goes down for maintenance or needs an oil change, we will always have one able to circulate. And
With
then
70
secondly,
square mile area, I mean, you figured you said one direction and the
yeah,
other one in that direction, and they both have
exactly.
like routes, so you can cover everything, right? Like
Right, exactly. And there are
hopefully a
some
third to keep spider webbing it out.
ideas of doing some campaign type of collections where we'll go to a location where several patients are identified as having the need for these that they're collected. So we'll be going to some of those locations where in a sort of a campaign style where patients are already ready to get their
So
apheresis
they can like
performed too.
pre-register, or they'll have like a portal kind of thing,
Yeah,
and then they
we'll
can.
coordinate with the clinical trial sites for those so that
Oh,
they're
okay,
all lined
cool.
up. Some Fortunately, we're getting to a point in the field where some of the studies are earlier stage disease progression or autoimmune. So the patients don't have as much, they're not so late stage that they're hospitalized. I think the hospitalized model where patients are in the hospital and they need to have the cells collected in the hospital works for hospitalized patients, right?
Yeah.
But now with the outpatient protocols and more protocols for beyond hematological malignancies, that's where the mobile leukapheresis center really shines because the patient doesn't need to go into the hospital at that point. There is an outpatient procedure. They can collect those cells from their community and hopefully avoid, to your point, have a hybrid model where they're not having to go to the place where they are needing to get their therapy more than what's necessary, which is hopefully just to infuse or transfuse their cells in the end.
So say a patient, say your bus is, at an urban area, a patient comes and, and does their apheresis or leukapheresis collection there now, and the bus, continues like on its route. I would imagine, and is there like a carrier source that, comes to
Yeah,
the bus, picks up, the material and then sends it to where it needs to go, so that way the
exactly.
bus can stay on the road, right?
That's right. Yes, exactly. So our teams will coordinate with our logistics providers, which include our own organization, to do a rendezvous with the bus to make sure that we collect and get those cells out and onto their on their way to the next destination. Their next destination may be actually at our headquarters facility where we do cryopreservation of the cells. So we can do cryo until such time that we can actually perform that one day on the bus. We'll be actually be able to freeze the cells on the
Super
bus.
cool.
We're working on that. It's not available yet. So we instead would just within 6 hours have those cells transported to our facility, our depot, where we will cryopreserve those. But if they're fresh leukopak, which is in many cases what's required, they'll simply be drop shipped from the bus to their next destination to be immediately processed. We think that'll shorten the vein to vein time.
100%. Yeah. Like that could be hours to days for a patient. Time is everything, and
Yeah,
especially when it's hours and days, anything to
exactly.
shorten that time frame. So that's major cool. Like I would love to see that, when you're actually able to freeze them on site, and then
Hmm.
you might be at a further distance, and so like whether it's by car or helicopter or it has to
Drone
get on a
or
plane. Yeah, what
yeah.
exactly, like.
In Phoenix, they're studying. There's a next generation of kind of the Waymo has the automated AI, not AI, but the self-driving vehicles that's like a taxi
Oh,
that you
yeah,
can
yeah,
get
yeah.
into, right? It's called Waymo. Well, Amazon's come up with kind of a counterpart, which is very interesting. It looks like a tram. It opens the doors or open up so someone who's handicapped can come in and out. And I think they're also exploring how to use that same mechanism. It's a self-driving vehicle, but it can also transport goods, right? And Amazon obviously has plans for that, I'm sure. But when you think about medical transport and being able to really, really quickly have complete chain of custody, awareness of where things are in transit, and maintain control, yet call upon it as an Uber would be to get there essentially right away and have a little package transported from A to B. You could do that with ground transportation with something like that in the future, but certainly with drones, I think there's a future to roll in those activities for critical, time-sensitive biological materials like these.
Because, like, say a patient comes in to do like an apheresis, and that's on average what, like, a 4-hour collection, give or take, if it's the double
Mhm.
arm, right? So, like, as that starts, you get on the thing, you schedule the courier,
Exactly.
be like, okay, it'll be ready in 4 hours, be here in 4 hours and 1 minute or whatever,
Absolutely.
and then that way, boom, they're there. You load it up, and it's on its way.
Yeah,
That's super
exactly.
cool. It's
Yeah, the
way
future's
cool.
gonna be here faster than we know, and we just gotta tap into those exciting innovations and superimpose what this industry needs over those things. I mean, between automated manufacturing, data that's real time, capability to create centralized models like the Mobile Leukapheresis Center, but decentralize their footprint, use tools that help patients navigate or payers or providers navigate the patient's journey and next opportunities for either clinical trials or commercial therapy. And there's so much technology nowadays that is being improved upon that we can tap into as an industry and say, let's not settle for anything less than finding every patient who possibly could be supported by these therapies and give them access. Let's just give them access by being very innovative and using things that are already making a difference in other fields.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool, and it's changing so fast. I was talking about cell phones the other day. I mean, like, as a kid, watch Saved by the Bell. Zach Morris had that big thing, and then my dad, I remember when I was a kid, had it was like the phone in a box kind of a thing, and then
Yeah.
my first cell phone was like my freshman year of college, when it was the Nokia brick where you change out the battery, and then
Yeah.
they
It's
got
like this hard.
smaller and can flip, and now they evolved to iPhones and my cell phone, my iPhone, like, has more computing power than I think the computer we're recording this on, and I use it for so much, and it's just it just evolves and it changes, and that's the same thing with medical technology and innovation. That's why the education part of it, to me, like this education and awareness thing, because if it could be a future somebody or somebody they know or somebody currently, and it's just you got to know, and how else are people going to know unless they're talking about it? So, like, let's continue to be disruptive, and, like, I'm all about it. Like, so it's super exciting stuff. I'm going to be seeing your coworker next week in Salt
Good.
Lake City, but I will just be seeing him. I won't be going to the other conferences
Yeah.
that during that week,
Will
and
you be in Phoenix for meeting on the Mesa by any chance? Okay. Yeah.
nobody
Not yet.
didn't
Not
get
this
the
year.
invite.
Okay.
I've had it on my radar,
Yeah.
and I've met a few people from there,
Mhm.
met, in a few different events. I know some people on their board. I've never,
Yeah.
you know, I've never gone, and
Well,
everything's
maybe if there's a way we can get you a place or if you're already planning to be in at the Advanced Therapies Week in San Diego next year.
I wish I was going. I
Okay.
haven't really got an invite or
Yeah.
anything, and I
Okay.
can't
I think they're still in the
necessarily
planning
afford to
stages,
go.
so maybe
Yeah.
there's a chance. We'll hopefully get some people together to
Yeah,
get
that'd
that
be
idea
great.
going.
I would
Yeah.
love to go. I started keeping like a list on a calendar a couple of years ago of
Mhm.
the specific events and conferences. Like, it started with going to a couple annual melanoma advocacy things, and then I started looking at what else was out there and what people were going and everything. And so both nationally and internationally. So I always kind of had
Yeah.
this like mental list and everything, but as a cancer survivor, like I just assumed that I would rebound like my previous self was. I didn't really realize the toll everything he'd taken, and as mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, emotionally, mentally, physically, and financially. And so right now I'm
Yeah.
really trying to focus on that. In fact, after this, I got to go pick up a draw from my HELOC loan I had to take out and deposit it so I don't bounce
Okay.
my bills.
Yeah. Yes, that's
But
important. Definitely do that.
I really trying to focus on coming out of kind of this hole, and I'm feeling very positive.
Mhm.
And what I'm doing, I believe, is real important. Like I said, it's meaningful, it's purposeful, but I feel like it needs to be done. But I didn't have any of the background, and I've been learning as I go. And but I feel like I've made a lot of headway, and am and am doing good. It's just it's life's full of valleys and seasons and hills, and right now I'm just kind of at the bottom of the hill, and I'm at a season
Mhm.
that's been a really long time.
Yeah.
But I been real positive about it. I just started seeing a psychiatrist. I've had family help me out with a lot of things lately, dental appointments, new tires on my truck, paying for the therapy,
Mhm.
and so they have always been real supportive. So I also today was looking at my finances, and decided I needed to my premium LinkedIn subscription. I canceled that, so
Mm.
and that's only
Yeah.
2 more weeks.
I've
But
had
it
to
was like
leave things out too.
a
Yeah.
couple of it's like I said, I cut off cable and streaming a couple of years ago. So I'm trying to be very conscious of, my budget, and just had a hailstorm come through about a week ago. So
Gosh.
depending
Yeah.
on what the damage is, but it's like there's a deductible if I do need
Yeah.
stuff can I afford. So
Mm.
it's so I'm frustrated, but I'm plugging along, and so I'm really trying to figure it out. But as it's purposeful, it's meaningful, and I said like there's a need for the population to hear patient stories, been able to connect with a lot of other patients, not just that had my specific type of cancer, but other that have
Right.
done cell therapies like Victoria that's done CRISPR, Jimmy, met Emily Whitehead, Lori Adami, CAR T patients, and then other TIL patients that have had other kinds of diseases and that have done them both like either at the NIH, NCI setting or at another organization. So a lot of really cool conversations, and it's got to start somewhere. So here we are.
Yes.
And I'm very excited for people that don't know. I don't think we mentioned this, but the Red and White Gala Ball in
Mhm.
San Antonio is going to be at the Riverwalk Marriott on November 15th. That's a Saturday. So if you're around and can go, please, purchase a ticket. If not, I will plug a link for that event. On my socials and my sites when on the website, as well as this, in case you're interested or have any information or questions about BBG or what they do.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, Chris. I know you
Yeah.
and your family plan to visit and be part of that incredible gala. It's always a great thing to see the community come out in support of our cause and our mission. And this year we're going to focus on showcasing the Mobile Leukapheresis Center and helping people see how that innovation will help change lives and continue to enhance the mission. This will be somewhat new for a lot of the people in the audience who are typically seeing what we do on the blood side, the Heroes in Arms and
Yeah.
the Whole Blood program, but this is different for them. So it's very exciting for them to hopefully get a chance to meet you and understand your journey too. And there's some very generous people in our city who come out every year and support this cause. And so it's exciting to be there, and I'll be there for sure as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I live in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and right as I was getting diagnosed in 2018, when I started doing treatments and everything immediately, I did fertility preservation, but I never have had any children or kids. I don't
Hmm.
have any pets. And so I'm trying to keep my calendar busy. I want to be out on the road if possible. Anything I can do to help or aid in this mission we both share and are passionate about. It means a lot having you on. And just everything that y'all are doing. I mean, like y'all are trendsetters, and I can't wait to see other blood centers like Carter Blood Care is up here in Dallas, which is
Hmm.
also part of the BCA. But to see them have a bus
Hmm.
and see all the other blood centers, in other hospital organizations, I'm saying like I would
Yeah.
imagine like do you have to patent the bus or
No, yeah, it's more of an open source concept.
okay?
But yeah, I mean, I think we see ourselves just like the pre-hospital whole blood program as able to support where we're needed. If there's a need for us to like a geography where there isn't an organization able to help, of course we would be willing to go there. But our focus is on South Texas for the most
Yeah.
part. We have a location in our organization in Georgia as well, but not for the advanced therapies right now. But I think that it's a matter of demonstrating this for the industry and helping educate and create the standards so that it can spread like wildfire, we hope. We think that this is a part
Yeah.
of the ecosystem that's needed, and it's probably bigger than what we are at the moment, and we hope that others can adopt this. I think that's where the true impact will be felt, is when this is something that isn't just available in one location or just a handful, but it's something that's routine and just expected and standardized.
Yeah, like I said, like as the generations to come, as they, like I said, they're in the elementary school age, middle school, high school, but
Mhm.
in the generations that continue to come up, like what we're talking about right now, should just be like standard, normal first thought of conversation when it comes to I'm sick or I'm diagnosed with anything, and people one day will proudly be using the word cure when it
Right.
comes to things that traditionally have not been so before.
Think
And
we it would be our work will have been successful if in our lifetimes people hear the word cancer or chronic disease and they're no longer afraid that they'll never have a better chance
yeah,
than what they've heard about, seen, and 50% chance of surviving 5 years or 6 years. That's not something we should ever have to contemplate. And
yeah,
I don't want cancer to be something that there is no hope. For many people who have cancer, there's not a lot of opportunity to
it's
survive.
100%. I mean, it's extremely scary, like, when you hear that because 'cause you're like, "Oh my god," like, everybody's got an expiration date, but you just don't know when or how,
Yeah,
but once you hear those words, like, then it starts sinking in, like, time's running out, like, the sand in that hourglass is falling a lot faster than it has before,
yeah,
and it could be overwhelming. You're like, "What do I do?" You know? And
uh,
so but exactly, within our lifetime, when this does happen, hopefully that will be
won't be
less,
such a scary word.
yeah, it won't be just such a scary word, and,
Hmm.
people like, "Oh," like, there's cures for that. I remember growing up, like, AIDS, like, in the '80s, it was like, "Oh my god," like, nowadays, it is
Yeah,
so treatable. It's just like a lot of other diseases throughout, like, the last, like, 150 years, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
over time, they coming up with ways and, you know, uh, now, that'll just be one of those things where it's like, "Oh,
hmm,
no biggie," or
exactly.
you know what I mean? So,
Yep.
like, super cool stuff, and, hopefully there'll be more marketing and education both for the patients and the physicians, so that way there's just a more of a mass knowledge of it,
Yeah.
and that can
Popular
kinda
knowledge,
yeah,
and yeah, and everybody knows that this is an option, and how
yeah.
to go about getting that, and that it's available where they live rather than 8 hours away. It's
Well, and even if
1,500
it's
miles
not,
away.
like,
Yeah,
your first couple appointments, like, you
exactly.
usually go in there and you have somebody with you, record your appointment, but have a list of questions, and then that's one
Mhm.
of those things where it's like, ask those questions, kind of clinical
Exactly.
trials do you got? What kind of cell therapies are you working on? Like,
Mhm,
are you
mhm.
familiar with them? And hopefully they say yes, and if they do, then they can tell you what they got, and then even what they don't got, they can tell
Yeah,
you, "Well, here's what's out there. We don't have it, but here's who does,"
right.
and so but if you're presented with everything that's out there and then you can pick and choose, then it's a choice. But then and if you're not, then it's not a choice. It's a lack of options because or
Yeah,
it's not even an option. So
exactly.
super cool
Well,
stuff.
yeah, and thank you also, Chris, for having me on. It's a genuine, it's honestly such a pleasure to be here and truly inspiring as well to always visit with you. And yeah, keep fighting the good fight for the people who have will come after. There's a lot of people who need help who are inspired by your story, and keep plugging away at it and continuing to do what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adrian. Everybody that's tuned in and listen, thank you so much. Thank you. God bless. Peace. All right, that concludes today's episode of Till Talks with Chris White as we talk TILs, tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, and all advanced cell and gene therapies. As a reminder, I am not a medical professional or medical expert. I am only a professional and expert on my story and my experience. If you are needing or seeking medical advice or assistance, please reach out to your care team. I'd like to thank my guest today for joining me on Till Talks. To our listeners who have not yet done so already, please follow, comment, subscribe, share, and smash that like button. For more information about Till Talks and related resources, please visit www.tilltalks.com. I'm Chris White. As always, sending love to everybody. Peace.